Another tumble on Wall Street this morning as markets respond to the reciprocal tariffs that went into effect at midnight roughly on 60 countries and the European Union. This is on top of the blanket 10% baseline tariffs that started on Saturday. And here is where the markets stand right now. You can see it's down 302 points. It's a back and forth day so far, but at this point, the Dow, it is down. Now, the major tariff making headlines, though, a whopping 104% on China. Concerns of a trade war on the rise now after China announced an 84% retaliatory tariff on the United States. The escalation between the world's largest economies started back in February. That is when President Trump issued a 10% tariff on Chinese imports into the U.S. China quickly hit back with its own retaliatory tariffs on February 10th. Now, just 1 month later, President Trump doubled his initial tariff to 20%. On the same day, Chinese officials announced another round of tariffs up to 15% on farming and poultry goods to go into effect on March 10th. This last week, the president unveiled sweeping tariffs on nearly all imports into the U.S., including 34% taxes on China. Again, China responded with a retaliatory 34% levy. The situation ramped up on Monday when Trump posted on social media calling on China to withdraw that 34% tariff or face another tax levy. The deadline? Last night. Well, China refused to do so, and Trump added that 50% tariff. He also warned any upcoming talks with China would be canceled. And as we mentioned earlier, China responded with an 84% retaliatory tariff this morning as part of its vow to fight to the end. That levy is set to take effect tomorrow. Also in effect today, Canadian counter tariffs on some U.S.-made auto parts. The White House says Trump is still waiting for a call from China to discuss an end to the exchange. In the meantime, the president says about 70 countries reached out to negotiate lower tariffs. Leaders from Japan, South Korea, and Italy are expected to visit the White House next week to meet with Trump. The European Union, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe, they already proposed their deal to end the taxes. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave more insight into the ongoing deals during a question and answer at the American Bankers Association. Let's listen to that.
I was out telling other countries, don't retaliate. And I think what a lot of people are missing here is that the levels that were put out last Wednesday are a ceiling. So if you don't retaliate, that is the ceiling. I'm going to take a lead negotiating role in a lot of the tariffs, starting with the Japanese delegation. But in terms of escalation, unfortunately, the biggest offender in the global trading system is China. And they're the only country who's escalated. And I can tell the rest of the world that I'm not sure whether it was the prime minister or the economic minister in Spain made some comments this morning. Oh, well, maybe we should align ourselves more with China. That would be cutting your own throat. I think, Rob, at the end of the day, that we can probably reach a deal with our allies, with the other countries that have been long-term. They've been good military allies, not perfect economic allies, and then we can approach China as a group.
So President Trump took to social media today to calm the country in this time of uncertainty. He pulled out several posts, including, quote, "Be cool, everything is going to work out. This is a great time to buy," and "Make America Great Again." CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang has more on the president's response in just a moment. But I want to bring in CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger for more on this. And Jill, good to see you. The European Union just voted to approve retaliatory tariffs on $23 billion in goods. It's in response to Trump's 25% tariffs on imported steel and aluminum. So the question here is, how significant are these tariffs from both China and then now the EU?
You know, I think we take this whole tariff situation together, and it's the best way to look at it, because any single nation, we could probably have a different kind of conversation. But when we look at the totality of the tariffs that the U.S. has announced and the retaliation that we've seen from some of these countries or blocs, we know that there are two usual outcomes if they stay in place. One, higher prices. Two, a slowdown in growth. And that is one of the biggest reasons behind the big stock market sell-off over the last few sessions.
And we know this is a volatile time right now on the market. Can you walk us through the connection here between Wall Street and Main Street? And how should everyday Americans read these numbers right now?
Well, look, I mean, the stock market, it's not a person, it's not even like a single thing. It's kind of like an information processing machine. When you buy a stock, you're betting on a company's long-term ability to make money. And you're a part of that. You're an equity holder of a piece of that company. When you buy a stock market index or you look at that index, you look at all these different companies together. But what the market overall is looking like now is almost like a referendum on this tariff plan. And what you really are seeing at the end of the day is an investment community that's really uncertain about what is going to be the length of time tariffs stay in place, what will the tit-for-tat retaliation, where those levels take us, and what will the impact be on companies. You know, just this morning, Walmart said, we're not going to give you any estimates of what we think is going to happen next because we have no idea. And Jerome Powell has no idea. So we've got to wait for data to come out. If you're a long-term investor, take a breath. Hopefully you don't need any of your money anytime soon. You stay the course. But if you are somebody who, by mistake, maybe you got overly aggressive, you put your kids' college tuition money in a portfolio of stocks and bonds, get out, free up the money that you think you'll need in the next 12 to 18 months. I'm really clear that there are many people who thought the gravy train of the stock market's rise would continue under the Trump administration. And maybe it will. Maybe this will all reverse. But you can't take a risk right now. If you know you need your money within, again, 12 or 18 months, get that money out of risky stuff. It goes into a money market, it goes into savings, it goes into short-term CDs. Nothing that fluctuates that you know you would have to take a risk should be where that money sits.
Yeah, some very important advice there. Okay, so this all comes as part of President Trump's larger plan to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Trump took to social media to remind companies of the larger goal. And here is what he had to say. He said, quote, "This is a great time to move your company into the United States of America, like Apple and many others in record numbers are doing. Zero tariffs and almost immediate electrical and energy hookups and approvals. No environmental delays. Don't wait. Do it now." When will we see the price of goods go up? And really, Jill, which products will be affected the most here?
You know, think about the process as an inventory question. So you go to a grocery store and there's a big crate full of avocados. Now, someone goes and buys all those avocados, and now there has to be another order. This next order that comes in will be tariffed. So the same thing goes through every single area of the economy when it comes to goods. So obviously, perishables, that's where you're going to feel the first impact. But the next impact could be, say, apparel or footwear. It could also be electronics. It could be laptops, iPhones. It could also be in the auto sector. We know that those auto tariffs are in place, auto parts. So, you know, again, if you've got an auto insurance policy and you just renewed it, great. But if somebody's policy is coming up for renewal in the next group of months and these tariffs are still in place, you can bet those premiums are going to rise.
Yikes. All right. Jill Schlesinger, as always, thank you so much for your insight. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Now let's bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang for more on how the Trump administration is responding. Weijia, we heard both Trump and Scott Bessent there warn Americans not to retaliate against the tariffs, but does the president intend to respond to the EU? Earlier, I was hearing that some countries said they've reached out and they haven't heard anything back.
Yeah, we have asked the White House for a response about the EU's retaliatory tariffs that you and Jill just talked about. And so far, they have not said anything about that or the fact that China has also imposed an additional 50% tariff on American exports, bringing the rate there to 84%. But we know that in the executive order that the president signed about tariffs, there is something in there that says if countries retaliate, the U.S. will retaliate retaliate again. And so we fully expect that to happen. In fact, preemptively, we know that the U.S. did respond to China's retaliatory tariffs by adding another 50% on to the rate for Chinese imports. That's all very confusing, but the bottom line is it is now 104%, as you have also been talking about this morning. So we fully expect that the administration will add more tariffs to the EU, even though it is a critical ally in so many other areas. As for the other countries that are looking for a trade deal, as you mentioned, we're talking about 60 countries. And so it's going to take time because the president said that these deals are not going to be, quote, off the rack. Everyone's not going to get the same thing because the U.S. wants something different from each nation. He says they will be tailor-made. And of course, those talks take time to sift through.
Okay. The president also announced a possible tariff on imported pharmaceuticals. Do we have any more information on this one?
So last night, President Trump said that he would be making an announcement soon about tariffs on pharmaceutical drugs. And just a short time ago, the U.S. trade representative, the top trade official in this administration, Jamieson Greer, was sitting for a Senate committee hearing. And he was asked about this. He said that there has to be an investigation. There has to be more fact-finding about the imports of pharmaceuticals, which is exactly why, for now, they are not part of the broader tariffs plan. Before that they can announce exactly what that deal is. So we don't have much information except what President Trump has said himself, which is they are coming soon.
Okay, and Weijia, while we have you, the Treasury announced new sanctions on Iran. This comes as Saudi Arabian leaders meet with Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington today to discuss Iran's nuclear plan. What more can you tell us about that?
That's right. Those sanctions are against the entities that oversee Iran's nuclear program. And we know, of course, that President Trump has been very explicit that he wants to broker a deal with Iran to stop that from going forward, because he says, frankly, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And so the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is meeting with Saudi officials today ahead of a really critical meeting on Saturday between the U.S. and Iran. And that will take place in Oman, a third-party country. Because, again, they are taking steps to try to get Iran back to the table to negotiate something which has been difficult because it was President Trump who pulled out of a deal known as the JCPOA when he was president the first time around. So this meeting between Rubio and Saudi officials could be, partly to strategize, to talk about how we can get this back on track, which, again, is a very important goal for the president.
All right. Weijia Jiang from the White House, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure.